Magandang araw sa inyo. This is Gino Gonzalez. I was a trained set and costume designer, and I normally work in the theater, film, or television as a production designer for period productions. My interest in the Philippine dress is a direct result of my design work, which requires me to deal with clothing history. I'm also a part-time teacher, and I co-authored 2 publications on the Philippine dress. So please join me in this 3-part series on the evolution of the Philippine dress. We begin with the Traje de Mestiza, Philippine dress, Session 1. Here are our objectives for Session 1. Familiarization with Philippine dress history and evolution. Identification of the various parts of the Traje de Mestiza. Understanding how a panuelo is folded properly. And finally, an appreciation of Filipino ingenuity. Here are some basic terms which identify the many parts of a traje de mestiza. So please try to familiarize yourselves with these terms before we discuss the evolution of the dress. A camisa or a baro is a shirt or blouse. A panuelo or candonga is a fichu or kerchief. A tapis is a rectangular cloth wrapped around the skirt. A saya is the actual skirt. A corpiño is a sleeveless undershirt or undergarment. An aguas is a petticoat. So we begin with the 1500s and the pre-colonial period. The Philippine Islands had many thriving communities long before the Spaniards arrived in the 1500s. Being an archipelago, the area had many indigenous communities which developed their own unique clothing traditions. When the Spaniards landed, they first encountered the Visayans and their lavishly adorned bodies. Women basically had components from which the Philippine dress would evolve. They had a bayu or baru, which is primarily a blouse. They had a patadlog or patadyong, which was a rectangular piece of cloth that was wrapped around the waist and held in place by a sash. And all of these articles of clothing were sewn with real gold components. When the Spaniards arrived in the Tagalog region, they saw somewhat similar clothing on women. These were made up of a baro as an upper garment and a tapis as a lower garment. So you can see the baro and tapis already existed before the arrival of the Spaniards, and they were not responsible for introducing these clothing items to the women here. By the 1600s, the Spaniards supposedly imposed a new mode of dress that somehow satisfied their own ideas of modesty. The woman in the 1660s drawing is shown with a baro or camisa and a new addition, a skirt which was eventually called a saya. By the 1700s, during the second century of the Spanish regime, we can look at this map by Pedro Murillo Velarde. To see how people dressed in the 730s, we can look at the drawings by Nicolas de la Cruz Bagay, which features various scenes from the Philippine Islands. Here, we can isolate two frames that show how women dressed. Here is one frame. We see a group of people in a busy street. The first figure on the left is a woman headed to church wearing a cobija or veil. The second is a fruit seller wearing a camisa and a tapis wrapped around her waist, not too different from what we saw in the Boxer Codex. The third is a far distant dancer also wearing a similar set of clothes. But in another frame, we see a woman wearing a three-piece ensemble. She is wearing a camisa, a tapis, and a saya underneath her tapis. This woman is labeled as a mestiza, or a female with either a half Chinese or half Spanish lineage. And so the dress of these women were called the traje de mestiza, or the outfit of the half Chinese or half Spanish female. By the 1700s, 2 centuries into Spanish rule, the fichu became a fashionable accessory in the West. The fichu was usually a triangular piece of cloth made of soft fabric that was wrapped around the chest, at a time when dresses exposed much of the bosom. So the fichu functioned as a covering as well as a decorative accessory. By the end of the 1700s, we can already see visual evidence of this Western trend being adopted in the Philippines. In this painting, we see two women wearing the following: a panuelo, or a fichu, completely covering the neckline, a camisa underneath the panuelo, a tapis worn over a saya. We can also see the woman wearing a tambourine, which is a necklace with a pendant. By the 1800s, the last century of the Spanish regime, sweeping political changes in France also affected how women dressed. After the French Revolution radically simplified court dresses into simpler shapes that evoked Grecian costumes, the empire waist became the dominant fashion silhouette in the West. A few decades later, the empire fashion proportions found its way in the Philippines as the natural waistline also rose below the bosom of the women. In a circa 1820s drawing by Damian Domingo, we see a woman wearing the following pieces: a panuelo with scallop edges, worn over a camisa with straight sleeves, done in the empire silhouette. We see a tapis placed high on the waist, and a saya which now appears narrower. Over the head, we can also see a peineta, or a decorative hair comb. Notice also that none of the pieces match in terms of pattern and color. An actual garment from this period confirms the empire proportions drawn by Damian Domingo. Here is a camisa done in embroidered piña cloth. It has straight sleeves, a short torso to simulate an empire line, and it has an interesting feature: a tapapecho, or chest covering for modesty. This is also an indication of the women's rejection of constricting European undergarments. Weather conditions force weavers to innovate and make use of available fibers that created sheer, lightweight material like piña cloth. This cloth was ideal for the tropical climate, so this meant that we did not merely follow trends from the West, but we responded with ingenious solutions better adapted to Philippine lifestyle. By the 1840s, Victorian fashions in the West lowered the waistline back to a more natural level, and skirts also became more voluminous. In the Philippines, a painting by Justiniano Asuncion illustrates a mestiza wearing the following: a panuelo, which is now a wider version, a camisa, which is somewhat looser and now has turned up cuffs, a paño or pañolito, which is normally held with an abanico or a fan, and a saya, which is now slightly wider than the earlier version. We also see the woman wearing a pair of corchos, the traditional footwear of the period. By the 1860s, we already have the benefit of looking at actual photographs. In the West, the pagoda sleeves, which are cone-shaped, became fashionable. Skirts also became voluminous, requiring an understructure called a crinoline to support them underneath. This shape of the skirt is called a cupola, which resembled an inverted cup. By the 1860s, women were wearing a panuelo, now ending in 2 points, a camisa with pagoda sleeves which did not necessarily match the panuelo, a saya, which is done in the cupola skirt shape, which is also supported by enaguas instead of a Western crinoline. Here is an actual example of a camisa from the period. It is made of elaborately embroidered piña cloth, and over the shoulder, we can see shearing or gathering that gave the sleeves volume and the pagoda shape. By the 1870s, the bustle skirt becomes the popular fashion silhouette. The exaggeration of the backside was achieved by the insertion of an understructure. In the Philippines, rigid understructures were not favored by women, so the exaggeration of the backside was approximated by the transfer of gathering around the waist to the back of the saya. This Chinese mestiza from the 1870s can be seen wearing the following: a panuelo, now ending in 1 point, a camisa, now matching the panuelo, and a saya de suelta, which means a saya worn without a tapis, with sinamay facing to support the skirt shape, as evidenced by the creases underneath the skirt. The use of sinamay is also an ingenious way of using local materials to achieve desired effects without using Western contraptions. In another 1870s photo, we already see evidence of an effort to coordinate the embroidery on the panuelo and camisa, from which the term ternos bordados was coined. In this circa 1880s photo, we see a young Leonor Rivera, the inspiration for the character Maria Clara in Dr. Jose Rizal's Noli Me Tangere. Like Leonor, Maria Clara was dressed in the Traje de Mestiza, and in later decades, the Traje de Mestiza silhouette will be referred as Maria Clara, which evoke images of Rizal's tragic love. In the 1890s, during the last decade of the Spanish regime, the leg of mutton dominated Western fashion with its wide, voluminous sleeves that resembled a piece of ham. This fashion also had an effect on the camisa, as sleeves widened to approximate its shape. The shirpina and husi were flimsy by nature, and women resorted to applying gao or starch to stiffen the material so that they looked perpetually inflated. Perhaps the most iconic image of this period's traje de mestiza is the La Bulaqueña by Juan Luna. Here we see the panuelo, now stiffened with starch and with two dimples on either side. We also see more of the woman's neckline as an effect of this new method of folding the panuelo. We can also observe a drop shoulder and the sleeve starting narrow at the armhole as it suddenly bursts away from the arms. By the turn of the century, the traje de mestiza, which was initially associated with a particular race or social class, eventually extended to women of all walks of life in the Philippines, becoming not only the dress of the mestizas, but women in general, who now recognize themselves as Filipinas as they awakened to a collective national consciousness. In recent times, most Filipinos have forgotten how to fold a panuelo properly. So hopefully, by watching this demonstration by Riza Hernandez, we can replicate the process in a smaller or more manageable scale. The actual size of the panuelo is typically 36 by 36 inches. But for expediency, we will use an ordinary piece of bond paper and reduce the size to 8.5 by 8.5 inches.